I'm Andreas Blum, parish priest to the German-speaking Catholic parish of St. Boniface in London.
And I'm Barbara Höfling, singer and director of the German Choir of London. Welcome to our podcast on theology and music.
Christianity begins with the story of the Passion, with horror and grief at the violent death of a human being. But many people crossed Jesus' path of suffering, whether indifferent, reluctant, powerless, compassionate, faithful or supportive.
In words and music, we want to try to put ourselves in the place of these people and look at where they touch our own lives, these minor figures in the biblical Passion story.
In Jesus' day, working in the fields was back-breaking work. The soil was mainly sand, rock and desert. One often had to put a lot of effort into preparing the fields, and even then, only 1/5 of the country was arable land. The most fertile areas were, of course, owned by the state or by priests. The Roman tax burden left private smallholders with less than half of their yields, and only if crop failures didn't bankrupt them first. In addition, they had to pay taxes for religious institutions and the welfare of the poor. No wonder, then, that many gave up or were forced to give up, and that those who stuck with it were required to do their utmost. One of them was a certain Simon, who probably came originally from Cyrene. Cyrene was a town on the Libyan coast of North Africa, with a well-known and important Jewish community. It is likely that Simon made money there, which enabled him to settle in Jerusalem, to live under Jewish law and near the temple. That, at any rate, was the dream of many diaspora Jews. But wealth and a retirement home did not mean retirement. Of course, he still had to keep working and go out into the fields. After a day's work, all he wants is to go home, exhausted and tired. But on this occasion, his routine is unpleasantly disrupted. In the wrong place, at the wrong time, he accidentally falls into the clutches of Roman soldiers, who rope him in for one of their executions and force him to help in a terrible way. He has to carry the cross of a stranger and a man condemned to death. Because he is a foreigner? Because he is black? Because he has broad shoulders? Or simply because the Romans can? The Roman soldiers actually had the power to coerce Simon, because there was a law that allowed a legionnaire at any time to order a Jewish man to drop everything and carry his burden, usually his marching pack, for a mile. This law, which was understandably hated, crops up elsewhere in the New Testament too. Jesus alludes to it in the Sermon on the Mount and literally counters it. If anyone requires you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles with him. On his way of the cross, this law of all things brings us to the final time when Jesus meets someone who still acts humanely towards him, albeit involuntarily. After this, he will encounter only torturers. At first, Simon himself will have found the help and service that was demanded of him, both physically and emotionally challenging. But the incident will not have left him unscathed. Whether he and Jesus exchanged words is not reported. Presumably, they both lacked the strength to talk. We also know nothing about Simon's fate. The Bible often does this, not least when it wants us to call on us to take on a role ourselves and finish writing the story with our own lives. What we do know about Simon, however, is that he had 2 sons. Alexander and Rufus are explicitly mentioned in the oldest Gospel, as if they were still known in the Christian community and could be questioned at any time about what had happened. This means that Simon will have thought about this Jesus of Nazareth and later joined the Christians with his own family, and this time voluntarily. The stranger whom he had once helped to carry the cross must at some point have become his Saviour and Redeemer, who actually carried him and his burden through life. At first, he had seen only one side of the coin. Faith now recognized the other side too. To this day, Simon of Cyrene has not been forgotten. His actions have become the epitome of one of the most central sayings of Jesus in the Gospel. In so far as you did this to one of the least of these of mine, you did it to me. None of us likes being forced to do anything, especially for the benefit of others. Coercion inevitably provokes reluctance and resistance and makes us immediately look for excuses to free ourselves of what we don't like. For example, when after graduation I became a member of L'Arche, a community of people with mental disabilities and those without. I was forced to share a room with one of the people with disabilities. And of course, I hadn't imagined that would happen, and I wasn't keen. And so, inwardly, I had already given in my notice before I'd even really arrived. But quite apart from the fact that Henry was actually letting me into his room, it was soon this immediate and lasting closeness in our room that not only made us friends, but also broke down the traditional division between caregiver and cared for. Of course, I was there for him, but he was there for me too, and in such a meaningful way as I had never thought possible. In retrospect, sharing a room with Henry was one of the greatest experiences and gifts of my time at L'Arche. Only, I certainly wouldn't have chosen it. At that time, I took the resolve not to react with knee-jerk resistance if I was forced to do something, but to look closer, to involve myself to a certain extent willingly. For if we become the neighbor of another person, even for a brief moment or against our will, if we can discover a freedom in coercion, even when it runs counter to our pride and self-image, if we transform the annoyance into a blessing, even if it costs us strength and we have to overcome reluctance, then perhaps we can also experience what Simon of Cyrene did. He who carries another is himself carried, even if at first he finds it hard to believe.